how would you describe to us what has been going on in development in the recent decades? What are those big trends that actually all of these hypotheses that you've just sort of outlined, some of them worthy of a Nobel Prize, don't fully explain?
So no, that's great, and it's well, let me try to not lose count now. So if I start with, probably the most striking thing is that poverty decreased rather dramatically in the world. Okay, so if and I like to look at that like that, it's highly correlated, and that's we probably have 2/3 of the extreme of the number of extreme poor people now than we had in 1990. At the same time, it's coinciding, and of course, for economists, not a surprise, it's also correlated with very fast growth in quite a lot of developing countries. Something like middle-income countries grew by about just under 4% per capita per year. That means, 30 years later, that does mean that they are, multiples, 3 times as rich than they were before, or even more than that. And so, you get that big progress. We can now look at a location where it happened. Well, strikingly, it happened mainly in Asia. It didn't really quite happen in Africa. So maybe the second stylized fact to emphasize is that, you get an Africanization of poverty, and probably by 2030, 90% or more will be living in sub-Saharan Africa. So you get that issue. Maybe a third one, and we can come back to that later on, is that more and more of that poverty is concentrated in what I call messy places. Fragility is a part of it. So probably, 40%, maybe, depending on definitions. We have endless problems with defining that, but 40, 50% of that are quite messy places already, if not more. Maybe then the fifth one is then it doesn't fit as easily that model. And why is that? If you read Acemoglu and Robinson carefully, or at least as it is written, I know they're probably more careful when you went to debate with this, but if you read it, it's a bit like, and it's definitely became that kind of view, is that it's all institutions. Now, if I look at these countries in Asia that made huge progress, countries like China, Bangladesh, Indonesia, India also, they made progress. And it's hard to describe them having these perfect institutions. They're definitely not the why nations fail perfection. Whether it's in the political institutions, some of them autocracies, and not the democracies that more or less is prescribed by the inclusive institution definition that they have. And it's also not as if they have perfect rule of law and all the things. There's plenty of poor economic governance, corruption, and all kinds of issues there as well. So it doesn't fit as easily, that bill. And I think that's important. So we make progress in a world of imperfection. I suppose my fifth trend, and maybe we can come back to that later, is that, this is the last 30 years. The progress was dramatic. I'm a bit more concerned about where it will go next, because a lot of the progress was made by not a single recipe in the economics, but always something to do with some form of allow markets to do something, basically to give signals for prices, not necessarily perfect competition or perfect markets or capitalist system, and secondly with some outward orientation. Okay, and that was there, and so you get to these things. But the important thing is really linked back to these theories. These places were far more messy than it was described. It definitely wasn't in a world of perfect markets, nor was it in a world where governments were clearly diligently fixing all the market failures in an obvious sort of way either. So there needs to be something else that helps us understand how countries get going. I don't know whether I can get to Singapore or United States levels with the kind of institutions I have in Bangladesh. That's not my question, or indeed the institutions we have in China. But the question is really, can we take off? And then the theories, especially the kind of this big thing, it's all perfect institutions first before all the other things can start working. It doesn't seem to apply. So we need to look at somewhere else in the here and now.